When I first moved into this neighborhood, all I wanted was a quiet place to breathe, not to flex, not to prove anything, just to exist. My name's Malik. I'm a 32-year-old software developer. I dress simple. I drive a beat-up Honda Civic that still runs like a dream, and I work remotely from my modest townhouse, tucked into a suburb that claims to be community first. A place where kids can ride bikes and dogs can poop without lawsuits. Or so I thought. That illusion cracked the day I met Pamela Davenport, a.k.a. HOA Karen. She was a self-declared monarch of Maple Glen Estates, president of the HOA, head of the Welcome Committee, and unofficial style inspector of the entire zip code. The first time she saw me, I was dragging a bookshelf from my U-Haul into my front door, wearing sweatpants and a code, eat, sleep, repeat t-shirt. I smiled and gave a friendly wave. She raised her eyebrows like I was holding a live raccoon. "Oh," she said, approaching with a clipboard. Always a clipboard. "You're the new homeowner?" "Yeah," I said, a little out of breath. "Moved in yesterday." She gave me a once-over. The kind of scan people do when they're looking for a receipt. She muttered. "We usually have a little more polish around here." I blinked. "Sorry." She smiled, tight and cold. "No offense, of course. But curb appeal matters in this community. And appearances are everything." Then she leaned in, lowered her voice, and said the words that stuck in my head like a rusty nail. "Try not to look poor. It brings down the property values." I froze. I thought I misheard her. "Excuse me?" She waved it off, already pivoting back toward her pristine white Range Rover. "Nothing personal. You're probably very nice. Just a little rough around the edges. First impressions matter, you know." She drove off, leaving me standing on my front lawn with a shelf in one hand and fire crawling up my spine. I should have let it go. But something about the way she said it, the entitlement, the dismissal, the arrogance in her tone, gnawed at me. I wasn't offended by being called poor. I grew up poor. I survived poor. I worked 3 jobs through college, built my first app on a secondhand laptop, and lived off instant noodles and ambition for 5 straight years. No, what got me was the assumption that my value as a neighbor, as a person, was measured by the shine on my shoes or the brand of my car. And Pamela? She wore her wealth like a badge and a weapon. A week later, it got worse. I received my first HOA violation notice. The offense? Improper trash bin storage. Apparently, my bin was visible from the street for 32 minutes after collection. 2 days later, another notice. Overgrown shrubbery. My bushes were trimmed, but not symmetrically. Then came the 3rd strike. Clothing line visible in backyard. That's when I realized this wasn't regulation. It was personal. Pamela had declared war. She wasn't just nitpicking. She was trying to force me out. And judging by the whispers I heard from neighbors at the mailbox station, she'd done it before. She chased out the last guy for painting his door blue, one woman muttered. Had the audacity to call it urban disruption. Another added. She made a family down the street redo their driveway twice. Said the color felt low income. Whatever that means. It was systemic, subtle, sharp, and I could have fought it with letters. Complaints. A lawyer, maybe, but I chose a different route. I decided to play her game, just not the way she expected. I stopped reacting. I smiled when she walked by. I nodded at her clipboard. I said things like, "Of course, Pamela," and "Thank you for the feedback." And while she thought she was winning, I was researching. See, what Pamela didn't know was that I wasn't just some coder living modestly. I was a founder of Cleavatech, a mobile security startup that had just been acquired by a Fortune 500 company for a figure that would make most people cry or vomit. I didn't flaunt it, didn't change my car, didn't start wearing Gucci slides to take out the trash. But I was watching the real estate listings. And that's when I discovered something interesting. Pamela's house, her fortress of white pillars, matching shutters, and custom porch swings, wasn't paid off. In fact, it was under a balloon mortgage with a 3-year term, and the clock was ticking. And if she didn't refinance soon, she'd be forced to sell. Suddenly, Her violations made sense. She wasn't just being petty. She was panicking, because her grip on the HOA was only as strong as her status. Lose the house, and she loses a crown. So I made a plan. I attended the next HOA meeting, dressed in the same hoodie she'd once sneered at, sat quietly in the back, listened. Pamela stood at the head of the table, running through violations like a tyrant reading from a scroll. And finally, Lot 17, she said, still non-compliant in terms of law and uniformity. The homeowner continues to present a visual dissonance inconsistent with our community's aesthetic standard. Everyone turned to look at me. I waved. Pamela narrowed her eyes. "Do you have anything to say, Mr. Mitchell?" she asked, voice dripping with smug. I paused, then smiled. "Actually, I'm saving my thoughts for the next meeting." She didn't like that. Not one bit. And she liked it even less when, 3 weeks later, a real estate listing quietly went live. Elegant 4BR home in Maple Glen. Quick sale opportunity. Owner? P. Davenport. The price was high. Too high for most buyers. But not for me. Not even close. I called the agent that night and made an offer. Cash. No contingencies. Close in 14 days. The agent gasped. Pamela never saw it coming. And the closing date was set exactly 4 days before the next HOA meeting. They say revenge is best served cold, but honestly, mine came gift-wrapped in legal paperwork and closed with a bow. When I submitted the cash offer to buy Pamela's house, her agent was floored. "You're serious?" she'd asked, like she'd just watched me drop a golden goose on her desk. "Dead serious," I replied. "Cash. No negotiation. I'll take it as is." It was the kind of offer that makes even the most reluctant seller fold. Clean, fast, and irresistible. Now, to be clear, I didn't buy the house out of spite. I bought it because it was conveniently poetic. And because the thought of HOA Karen having to sign my name on a property transfer made my inner child do somersaults. What sealed the deal, though, was how unprepared Pamela was. She had no idea how close her financial rope was to snapping. Her mortgage was bloated with missed HOA reimbursements she'd try to cover up by borrowing against equity. But refinancing? Out of the question. Her credit was a dumpster fire wrapped in tinsel. So when the agent called her to say someone made a full-price cash offer with no contingencies, she didn't ask who. She just accepted. Desperation makes people careless. I didn't go to the inspection. Didn't even flinch at the closing table. Just signed papers, transferred the funds, and walked out of that title office with keys to the castle of the woman who once told me to stop looking poor. But the best part? I timed the transaction perfectly. See, HOA meetings were held on the last Thursday of every month at 6:30 p.m. sharp, and I made sure the purchase of her home closed at 12 noon that very same Thursday. By 4 p.m., Pamela had been served notice by her own agent. She had until the end of the month to vacate. The woman who ran the HOA like her personal kingdom, the woman who had made me the target of every made-up violation, was now a tenant in my house with my rules, and the clock was ticking. I arrived at the HOA meeting early that evening. Same hoodie, same beat-up Civic, same guy she thought didn't belong. Pamela was already seated, her usual chair in the middle of the board table, surrounded by her loyal minions. Marcia, the enforcer of porch furniture standards in Glen, the self-proclaimed flag color coordinator. I took my usual seat in the back. She ignored me at first, probably still glowing from whatever delusion she thought she was living in. Then Arthur, one of the more reasonable board members, said, "Before we get started, we have a few new motions submitted by Mr. Malik Mitchell. Would you like to introduce them?" Pamela turned slowly. Her eyebrows twitched. "Mr. Mitchell," she said tightly, "I wasn't aware you were submitting motions. That's unusual." I stood up, cleared my throat. First motion. A community vote to eliminate the aesthetic harmony clause that allows board members to fine residents for things like clotheslines, mailbox fonts, and shrub symmetry. Some chuckles in the room. A couple of head nods. Pamela straightened. That clause exists for a reason. It preserves the integrity of. Second motion. I continued, cutting her off. a rule that prohibits board members from citing properties they've personally lobbied to remove or harassed on social platforms. Her face hardened. "You're out of line," she said. I ignored her. Third motion, an immediate vote to remove Pamela Davenport from her role as HOA president on grounds of harassment, financial misrepresentation, and a clear conflict of interest. Silence. The room was so quiet you could hear the sweat forming on her forehead. Arthur coughed. "On what grounds?" I smiled and pulled out a folder. "I now own her house." Gasps. Literal gasps. Pamela's jaw dropped. "You what?" I walked to the table, placed a copy of the deed down, and said calmly, "Close at noon today. I'm the legal owner, which means she's no longer a homeowner, and HOA rules state that only current homeowners can serve on the board." She stood up like she'd just been tasered. "This is outrageous. This is harassment. You mean like the 10 violations you sent me in 30 days? I said, "Or the time you told me to stop looking poor, because I wore sweatpants while moving a bookshelf." More murmurs from the crowd. Whispers. Some people visibly stunned. Others not surprised at all. Marcia finally spoke. Is this real?" Arthur looked at the document, nodded. "This is legitimate." Pamela spun around. "You can't do this. This is my community." "Correction," I said. "It's our community. You just forgot that along the way." The vote to remove her wasn't even close. 10 in favor, 2 against, 1 abstained. Just like that, Pamela was stripped of her title. I walked out of the meeting to a round of polite applause. Some people clapped. One guy gave me a fist bump. Another whispered, "You're a legend, bro." But the moment of real satisfaction came the next morning. I pulled into my newly acquired driveway just in time to see Pamela hauling a suitcase out her front door, her perfectly bleached hair frizzing in the early morning humidity. Her agent stood beside her, trying to explain the leaseback clause. "You have 7 days," she said. "That's what you signed." Pamela turned and locked eyes with me. "You did this on purpose," she spat. I stepped out of my car, holding a to-go cup of hot coffee. Let's just say appearances matter. Her face twisted. But this time there was no clipboard, no smug smile, no HOA crown, just a woman who'd pushed the wrong man too far. But I wasn't done, because, remember Glenn, the flag guy? He had his own secret, and I just found the receipt. If Pamela was the sword of the HOA, then Glenn was the scalpel. Where she was loud, Glenn was calculating, quiet, passive-aggressive with a smile that could curdle milk. He wasn't as theatrical as Pamela, but he was worse in some ways, because he used the rules like razor blades, slicing deep and clean, never leaving fingerprints. He called himself the patriot of the neighborhood. Every month, he sent out HOA email reminders about approved flag protocols, warning residents about non-compliant displays. Heaven help anyone who had a rainbow flag, a Juneteenth banner, or anything other than the classic American flag hung precisely 6 feet above the center of the front door. I'd seen Glenn harass a young interracial couple last year for hanging a Love is Love flag during Pride Month. He cited them for unauthorized visual messaging. He once fined a veteran for flying a Navy ensign because it detracted from national unity. But Glenn had a secret, one I discovered on accident. See, after I bought Pamela's house, I began digging through old HOA files, the publicly available ones. I wanted to see just how deep the rabbit hole of neighborhood tyranny went. Most of it was boring. Meeting minutes, landscaping complaints, a 3-month war over someone's koi pond. But then I found a folder marked Flag Incidents, Board Internal Review. It wasn't supposed to be in the public records. Inside were photos, time-stamped images, and anonymous complaints all connected to a single incident from 3 years ago. Glenn had been flying a Confederate flag in his backyard, not in front, where HOA rules applied. In back, behind a row of hedges. Hidden, silent, but visible from the second story of the neighbor's home, directly behind him. Mrs. Leona Cross, an 84-year-old retired schoolteacher who had filed 3 separate complaints. Each time, the board had resolved the matter quietly, claimed the flag had been removed. Glenn had written letters of apology, stating it was a historical relic from his grandfather and not intended to offend or divide. Yet the photos were time-stamped months apart. He had taken it down each time a complaint was filed, then quietly put it back up again. When Pamela was HOA president, she had dismissed the whole thing as a private matter. But now Pamela was gone, and I was the homeowner who had replaced her. More than that, I was now on the HOA board, not as a figurehead, not as a victim, as a voting member. And Glenn was no longer untouchable. At the next meeting, I came armed. Arthur chaired again, same spot, same folding table, but this time without Pamela's perfume choking the oxygen out of the room. Glenn sat to Arthur's left, clipboard in hand, pretending not to notice me. I waited until the end of the agenda. Any new business? Arthur asked. I raised my hand. Yes, I'd like to file a motion to review a prior board file. Incident flagged as flag incidents. Board internal review. Arthur blinked. That's a sealed item. Not anymore, I said, sliding the printed documents across the table. It was included in the old HOA Dropbox folder that was never properly purged. Glenn shifted. That file was reviewed and resolved. I looked him dead in the eye. You mean it was buried? He stiffened. It's not relevant to current board business. I'd argue that someone who used their board position to silence multiple complaints of racially offensive conduct isn't fit to enforce HOA policy anymore. The room went dead silent. You could hear the air conditioner kick on in the hallway. Arthur slowly opened the folder, read, looked at the photos, then looked at Glenn. Is this true? He asked. Glenn's lips pressed together, like he'd swallowed a lemon whole. It was a family heirloom. I didn't intend harm. That flag isn't a family recipe, I said, voice calm but sharp. It's a statement, one you kept making after multiple neighbors asked you to stop. And you only hid it because you thought no one could see. Murmurs in the crowd. One person muttered, I always knew he was shady. Arthur looked pained. This is serious. It's more than serious, I replied. It's ground for immediate removal under Article 9. Code of Conduct, subsection B. Abuse of position and disregard for community inclusion standards. Glenn stood up. This is a witch hunt. Arthur sighed. Glenn, sit down. I won't. This man, this new guy, comes in and thinks he can tear down everything we built. That's when I dropped the final blow. I also have statements from 3 other neighbors who said you warned them not to turn this neighborhood into the ghetto when they painted their shutters gray. Arthur's eyebrows shot up. You said that? Glenn's face turned the color of spoiled mayonnaise. I was quoted out of context. But it didn't matter. The vote was immediate. 8 in favor, 1 against, 1 abstained. Glenn slammed his clipboard down and stormed out of the room, muttering under his breath. He didn't resign. He fled. Afterward, several neighbors approached me with quiet gratitude. One woman hugged me. Another offered me banana bread. But the most surprising thing was a folded note left on my doorstep the next morning. Typed, no signature. It read, 2 down, 1 to go. Watch your back. M. It didn't take a genius. There was only one board member left who had ever defended Pamela or Glenn in a vote. Marcia, the queen of porch decor violations. The woman who fined a family for hanging wind chimes because the sound was too whimsical. And now she was coming for me. If Pamela was a hammer and Glenn was a scalpel, then Marcia Winslow was a fog. She never yelled, never argued, never raised her voice. But her influence spread like smoke under doors, silent, invasive, hard to trace until you were coughing on it. She was in her early 60s, wore pastel sweaters and pearls like a uniform, and walked her little white dog Daisy every morning at 6 a.m. sharp. The same route, same pace, same neighborly nods that had decades of weaponized gossip. Marcia was the kind of person who baked cookies for the family of someone she just voted to evict. And after Glenn's fall and Pamela's exile, I became her next project. It started subtly. My mailbox went mysteriously unserviced for 2 days. I checked with the post office. No hold requested, no delivery interruption. But someone had reported that my box had loose screws. That someone? No surprise. Marcia had submitted a maintenance ticket on behalf of the community. Then came the noise complaints. First, it was my music. I only played lo-fi jazz while working, but apparently repetitive bass frequencies were disturbing the pets. Then it was yard work at improper hours. I'd hired a service to mow bi-weekly, on Saturdays at 10 a.m. Apparently, that was intrusive to the tranquility of the block. None of these violations stuck. But that wasn't the point. Marcia wasn't trying to win. She was trying to wear me down. One passive-aggressive complaint at a time. Then came the whispers. Did you hear Malik's renting out rooms? I saw a different car in his driveway last week. I think he's flipping properties. Probably just using the neighborhood to cash out. Is it true he has cameras pointing at other people's windows? The wildest one, that I had secretly bought Pamela's house to turn it into a halfway home. I couldn't believe how fast it spread. One day I walked into the corner coffee shop and got looks. Cold, unfamiliar looks. People I'd waved to for months suddenly acted like I was radioactive. Even Arthur, the HOA president, called me in for a friendly sit-down. Malik, you know I've got your back, he said over coffee, but some people are saying you're making too many changes. Too fast. I stared at him. Too fast? Arthur, I've removed 2 racists and stopped the HOA from turning into a dictatorship. He sighed. I agree, but people get nervous when the status quo shifts. Marcia's been talking, quietly, carefully, planting seeds. So, what do you want me to do? I asked, bake banana bread and shut up? He smiled faintly. No, I want you to be careful, because Marcia doesn't fight clean. She doesn't go for the throat. She goes for the reputation. I nodded. I understood the game now. She wanted me out without ever touching me directly, so I decided to flip the script. I started by taking a walk through the neighborhood. Slow, purposeful, every yard with dead grass. I made a note. Every cracked sidewalk. Noted. Every home with out-of-date shutters or chip paint. I compiled a community standards evaluation based solely on the HOA's own rules. And guess whose house had 7 violations? Marcia's. Her porch bench didn't match her shutters. Her front garden exceeded height allowances by 5 inches. And, ironically, her prize wind chimes hung 1 inch too low over the entryway. I brought it all to the next board meeting. Arthur was there, along with the 2 new board members elected after Glenn and Pamela's departures. Melissa and Raj, both normal, decent people who'd had enough of the old guard. Before we begin, I said, standing up, I'd like to submit a few items for review. Marcia blinked, adjusting her glasses. Are these personal grievances, Mr. Mitchell? Not at all, I replied, laying out the folder. Just a thorough audit of all properties in the community, including mine. Figured if we're enforcing rules, we should enforce them evenly, right? Raj raised an eyebrow. Melissa grinned. Arthur suppressed a chuckle. Marcia opened the file. Her eyes narrowed. This is an invasion of privacy. No, I said, flipping open a printed HOA pamphlet. It's due diligence. Section 5, Article 3. Any board member may conduct visual compliance reviews from public spaces. I walked. I observed. I documented. Arthur leaned forward. These are your photos? Yes. And they're dated? Yes. Melissa chimed in. So, Marcia, your wind chimes are hanging 83 inches above the porch, but HOA regulation says a minimum of 84. Marcia cleared her throat. That's an outdated rule. I smiled. Then let's vote to amend it. Silence. Arthur nodded slowly. Marcia, given the number of active violations and your history of enforcement on other homes, I think we need to put this to a vote. Her jaw clenched. I have lived here for 28 years. And no one's trying to erase that. I said, we're just making sure the rules you enforce on others apply to you too. She stood. This is a personal attack. No, Marcia, Arthur said calmly. This is accountability. The vote was quick. 7 in favor of temporary suspension pending compliance. 2 against. Marcia gathered her things without a word. But before she walked out, she turned to me and said, "You don't belong here, no matter how many houses you buy." And for the first time I saw it, the same look Pamela had, the same flinch Glenn gave. They didn't hate me. They hated that I couldn't be controlled. But she wasn't done, because 3 days later, I received a letter. No return address. Inside, a single sheet of paper. Typed, it read, "Some roots run deep. Check your car brakes. WG." The letter didn't scare me at first. It angered me. Because after everything, the fake violations, the whisper campaigns, the passive-aggressive notes folded into HOA minutes, I'd thought we were past the point of anonymous threats. But check your car brakes. That crossed a line. And WG? I didn't need a decoder ring to figure out. Walter Gregory. Retired. Vietnam vet. Quiet. Lived on the corner lot with a massive American flag and the "Don't Tread on Me" bumper sticker that had faded in the sun. He never came to meetings, but he always voted by proxy and always in favor of Pamela, Glenn, and Marcia. He never once made eye contact with me. Until now. The next morning, I popped the hood on my Civic and stared for a full minute. I'm not a mechanic, but I know enough to spot what shouldn't be there, or what should. And right there, on the left side of the master cylinder, a brake line clamp was half unscrewed. Not completely removed, just enough to eventually fail under pressure. That wasn't an accident. That was a warning. I didn't panic. I called the police. They sent an officer who took a report, but shrugged when I mentioned Walter. "Got any proof?" he asked. "No, just a letter." He glanced at it. Typed, "No prints. No cameras." I shook my head. "Well," he said with a sigh, "keep your doors locked, and maybe don't leave your car unattended overnight." That was it. No follow-up. No neighborhood sweep. No questions asked. I realized then that the system these people clung to didn't just rely on bylaws. It relied on silence. Intimidation works best when victims don't speak up. So I did the one thing Walter didn't expect. I spoke. I wrote a full post, long, detailed, and factual, on the neighborhood Facebook group, complete with photos of the loose clamp, the typed letter, and a time-stamped maintenance report from my mechanic. The title? This is not just about HOA rules anymore. I didn't name Walter directly. I didn't need to. The comments blew up. Dozens of neighbors chimed in, some shocked, some skeptical, but many supportive. One woman wrote, "This is exactly why we need cameras on our driveways." Another, "Same thing happened to my son 2 years ago after a disagreement with the HOA. I thought I was just being paranoid." Within 24 hours, I had 4 private messages from people who suspected sabotage. Lights being unscrewed, packages tampered with, screws left near tires. The narrative had shifted. I was no longer the outsider. I was the guy telling the truth everyone else had been too afraid to say. And then, like clockwork, the damage control began. Walter emerged from his bunker of silence. That Friday at 7:45 a.m., he knocked on my door. I didn't expect that. He wore a faded army cap, flannel shirt, and the look of a man who had spent decades avoiding eye contact but now needed something. I opened the door slowly. Said nothing. "You posted something online." He said, voice dry, gravelly. Said, "Someone messaged your car." I raised an eyebrow. "That's right." He stared at me. "I didn't send the letter," he said, flat. Funny. No one asked if he did. We stood there. 2 men, 2 generations, 2 versions of the same battle. "You stirring up the neighborhood," he muttered, "turning folks against each other." "I'm telling the truth," I replied. "If that stirs people up, maybe they needed to be stirred." He clenched his jaw. "You think you're fixing things?" "No, I think I'm exposing them." He didn't respond, just turned and walked away. But that visit, it told me something. Walter wasn't in control anymore. He was reacting. And people like Walter don't react unless they feel threatened. Later that week, I hosted an open Q&A on my front lawn. Nothing fancy. Just a few folding chairs, a jug of lemonade, and a printed copy of the HOA bylaws. I called it Rewriting the Rules. And to my surprise, over 30 people came. Young couples, seniors, renters, even a few former Pamela supporters who had seen enough to realize the old guard wasn't protecting them. It was controlling them. I walked them through the proposal to limit board terms to 2 years, require public disclosures of HOA funds, ban anonymous complaints without photo evidence, and remove fines for subjective aesthetic violations. Applause broke out. Not loud, not wild, but real. And just when I felt like we were finally gaining momentum, my power went out. At first, I thought it was a fluke. Storm? Grid issue? But then I noticed something. Only my house was dark. I walked outside. Every neighbor's porch light was on. Every window glowed warm, except mine. I checked the breaker. No issues. Then I walked to the meter and found the tamper seal broken. Someone had cut the lock and flipped the main manually. That's not something you can do without bolt cutters and intention. I stood there, staring at the exposed wires, and felt the weight of it hit me. This was no longer about HOA policy. This was personal. They wanted to break me, isolate me, shut me down. But I wasn't backing down. I reported the tampering to the city. The next morning, a technician came and secured it, adding a camera-enabled smart lock this time, courtesy of a city safety pilot program. But while that was being fixed, a neighbor walked over, nervously, clutching something in her hands. "Mr. Mitchell?" she asked. "Yes. I found this in my recycling bin. I don't know how it got there. Thought you should see it." She handed me a folded paper. Inside, a map of the neighborhood. My house circled in red ink, with the words, Priority Zone scribbled in bold block letters. Beneath that, needs new ownership. No name, no signature, but a faint watermark in the corner. M.W. Marsha Winslow. The moment I saw the watermark, M.W., something cold settled in my chest. I'd been bracing for a pushback, even sabotage. But seeing that crude map, my home circled in red ink like a military target, made this feel like something darker. Needs new ownership. They weren't just trying to make me uncomfortable anymore. They wanted me gone. Marsha Winslow, sweet-talking, cardigan-wearing, HOA decorator-in-chief, had crossed the line from passive-aggressive HOA queen to full-on organized harassment. I thanked the neighbor who brought the note, a younger woman named Clarissa, who had only moved in 6 months earlier. Her voice trembled as she said, "I didn't want to get involved, but this is insane." She wasn't wrong. So I documented everything, the tampered power, the letter, the map, and passed it along to both the City Housing Authority and my lawyer, Kendra. She was already building a civil harassment case against the HOA's former leadership, and now, with direct evidence tying Marsha to a coordinated targeting attempt, things were about to go nuclear. But I knew something Marsha didn't. While she was playing chess with streetlights and complaint forms, I was already 2 moves ahead, playing a different game entirely. Ownership. See, what she failed to realize was that I hadn't just bought Pamela's house to make a point. I'd been quietly purchasing power in the neighborhood for months. Through a shell company I created under the name Civic Harmony LLC, I had already acquired Pamela's former home, a small duplex at the end of the cul-de-sac, 2 other properties facing foreclosure from years of HOA fines and penalties. The board didn't know it yet, but I now own 4 out of 50 homes in Maple Glen Estates. That put me in the top 10% of ownership, and that meant I had leverage. At the next HOA meeting, I arrived with a calm smile and a thicker folder than usual. Marsha sat stiffly at the table, pretending not to look at me. Arthur, Melissa, and Raj looked cautiously optimistic, since my last walkthrough had basically kicked Glenn out of the HOA. I raised my hand as the meeting opened. "I have a motion to present," I said. Arthur nodded. "You have the floor." I pulled out the map, laid it flat. This was anonymously placed in the neighbor's recycling bin. It lists my home as a priority zone for ownership transfer. It includes HOA watermarks and a reference to M.W. Marsha Winslow. Marsha inhaled sharply. "That could have been faked. Sure, I replied. If we ignore the fact that your signature on last year's holiday budget has the exact same initials watermark. Raj leaned forward. You watermark your memos? Marcia flushed. It's branding. Melissa raised an eyebrow. For a neighborhood memo? Arthur said nothing. He just looked at me. Continue. I did. I reported this to the city, the local housing board, and my attorney. This isn't just a zoning comment. It's targeted harassment, coupled with the recent tampering of my electrical panel. Yes, I have photos and a timestamp report. This establishes a pattern. More silence. I let it breathe. Therefore, I said, I'm submitting a motion for the immediate and permanent removal of Marcia Winslow from the HOA board on grounds of harassment, ethics violations, and abuse of position. Marcia stood. You're manipulating the narrative. I looked up at her. Calm. No, Marcia. I'm correcting it. The vote came quickly. 8 in favor. 1 against. 0 abstentions. Marcia stared at the board in shock. Her voice shook. I have lived here for 32 years. I have poured my life into this community. Arthur cleared his throat. And somewhere along the way, you decided that gave you the right to decide who belongs and who doesn't. She turned to me. This is your fault. I didn't even blink. It's your handwriting, Marcia. And then she was gone, just like that. 3 pillars of the old HOA guard, Pamela, Glenn, and now Marcia, toppled. That night, I walked the block with a different feeling in my chest. Not relief, not pride, responsibility. Because I knew this wasn't over. The HOA was just a symptom. The real disease was entitlement. But as I passed each house, porch lights turned on. One neighbor waved. Another stepped out to say, thank you. A kid rode past me on his bike and said, hey, Mr. Malik, my mom said you like Batman, but for neighborhoods. I laughed. Tell her Batman wears better shoes. Then I got to Pamela's old house, now a rental managed by Civic Harmony LLC. The tenant, a single mom with 2 kids, stood on the porch watering plants. She looked at me and said, you really bought this place to prove a point? I nodded. Something like that. She smiled. Well, point taken. The air felt lighter. Until I got home and found a thick envelope taped to my front door. Typed, heavy, thick. Inside, legal paperwork. A lawsuit filed by the remaining old guard HOA members on behalf of concerned residents, alleging abuse of board influence, inappropriate acquisition of neighborhood property, conflict of interest due to multiple ownerships, behavior unbecoming of a representative of community integrity. And the kicker? They were demanding my immediate removal from the HOA board with a court summons. Hearing date, 2 weeks from now. At the bottom, signed by Walter Gregory, the last man standing. And now, the final boss. 2 weeks. That's all the time I had before Walter Gregory, last loyalist of the old guard, dragged me into court in a final, desperate bid to take me down. The lawsuit was long, dramatic, and bloated with flowery language like preservation of neighborhood values and safeguarding community heritage. It wasn't just a legal document. It was a manifesto. The kind of thing you'd expect from someone who once referred to the HOA board as the last wall against societal decay. But despite the melodrama, it was real, legitimate. He'd filed it with signatures, most of them from residents I didn't even know. People who'd never shown up to a single HOA meeting but now, suddenly, were concerned citizens. I wasn't surprised. Walter had one weapon left. Nostalgia. He was rallying people who didn't care about rules or fairness, just familiarity. People who missed the days when Pamela ran things like a suburban dictatorship, when Glenn fined you for the color of your doormat, when Marcia decided whether your sunflowers looked too casual. They didn't care that I'd never broken a rule, that I'd helped rewrite the HOA bylaws to be fairer, more transparent, that I'd stopped abuses of power. They just didn't like that someone like me was in charge. So I prepared. I brought in Kendra full-time. She helped me draft a full defense strategy, comprehensive, organized, and bulletproof. We documented everything, all my property purchases, and the legal shell through which I acquired them, voting records proving I never forced decisions without quorum, proof that I'd abstained from votes where I had property-related conflicts, statements from dozens of neighbors who'd seen how the neighborhood had improved. We even included a statistical breakdown of HOA fine reductions under my leadership, a 74% drop since Pamela's exit. And then we did something Walter never expected. We countersued, not just for defamation or harassment. We sued for abuse of legal process. Because Walter's lawsuit wasn't about policy. It was about revenge. Meanwhile, in the neighborhood, the temperature was rising. Lawn signs started popping up like weeds. Bring back tradition, vote Walter. Say no to greedy landlords. One man shouldn't own the block. They weren't just targeting me. They were fear-mongering, making me out to be some corporate developer, a faceless slumlord. So I held another meeting. This time, not on my lawn, at the community park, under a rented canopy, with chairs, snacks, a projector. I called it Truth and Transparency, What They Won't Tell You. Over 60 residents showed up, some out of curiosity, some out of anger, but many, many to support. I stood in front of the screen, held up Walter's lawsuit, and said, "This is not about me owning too many homes. This is about control. This is about silencing progress. This is about punishing someone for not fitting their mold." I played recordings, showed documents, shared stats, and then I introduced one last surprise. A young man named Jared, 26 years old, black, former tenant of one of the homes I purchased. He took the mic and said, "Before Malik bought my building, my landlord hadn't fixed a heater in 4 months. No insulation, black mold. Malik bought the place and made repairs within a week. Didn't raise the rent. Didn't evict anyone. Just treated us like people." He stepped down. People clapped. I followed. I'm not perfect. I don't pretend to be. But I won't be run out of here because a few bitter people miss the good old days, especially when those days were only good for them. That night, Walter's side lost momentum, but he wasn't done. At the hearing, 2 weeks later, I saw him for the first time in a suit, neatly pressed, American flag pin on a lapel, hair combed like he was running for office. He sat flanked by 3 supporters, 2 of whom looked confused about why they were even there. We entered the courtroom. Small, clean, local judge, no cameras. The proceedings began. Walter's attorney made his opening statement, painting me as a corporate invader, someone using real estate loopholes to hijack democracy in Maple Glen. They even referenced my clothing, my Civic. I kid you not, they said. The defendant has presented himself as a humble neighbor, yet hides behind LLCs to amass property power unchecked. The judge blinked. "Is that illegal?" "No, Your Honor," the attorney admitted, "but it is unethical." Our turn. Kendra stood up and delivered the most calm, cold, efficient takedown I'd ever seen. She laid out the legality of every purchase, my abstained votes to avoid conflict, the blatant defamation and false claims, and the harassment tactics used to provoke me. Then she played the voicemail. Oh, yeah, I forgot to mention that. The day before the hearing, I'd received a call from a block number. I didn't pick up, but they left a message. It was Walter. His voice, unmistakable. He didn't realize the machine had picked up early. He was ran into someone, probably Glenn, who hadn't shown his face since his removal. I don't care what the rules say. He makes us look bad. He's embarrassing the entire board. If the judge won't shut him up, I will. One way or another, he's going. That voicemail played in full in front of the judge. Walter's face drained of color. The courtroom went silent. The judge leaned forward. "Mr. Gregory, is that your voice?" Walter opened his mouth, closed it, tried again. "It sounds like me." Kendra smiled. "Your Honor, we rest our case." The judge didn't even deliberate long. The ruling? Lawsuit dismissed with prejudice. Walter was fined for filing a frivolous suit, and my countersuit? Approved. I won damages, enough to donate half to a local housing nonprofit, and still renovate 2 more of my properties. The old guard was done, and Maple Glen had a new story now. The court ruling hit the community like a thunderclap. For weeks, Walter had puffed his chest around Maple Glen, rallying neighbors like it was 1952, and he was leading a charge against outsiders. Now, his lawsuit was officially stamped frivolous, and he owed damages to the very man he'd tried to run out, me. And what did I do with the check? I didn't buy a new car, didn't upgrade my wardrobe, didn't even throw a party. I used it to install solar panels on Pamela's old house, the one I now rented out to the single mom with 2 kids. Free energy for her, a quiet symbol for the rest of the block. Because this was never about vengeance. Not really. It was about reclaiming dignity in a place that tried to dictate what dignity looked like. But the war had left scars. Even after Walter's defeat, remnants of the old guard lingered. A few still crossed the street. When I walked by, lawn signs stayed up longer than necessary. Conversations went quiet when I rolled past the HOA bulletin board. I let them be, because I'd learned something important during this fight. Some people don't hate change. They hate feeling powerless. And the best revenge isn't making them feel smaller. It's making sure they no longer have the power to make you feel that way. Still, it wasn't enough to win in court or at meetings. I wanted to fix the rot. So we rewrote the bylaws from scratch. It wasn't easy. Over the next 3 months, I hosted more meetings than I could count. House-to-house visits. Late-night Zoom calls with residents who couldn't attend in person. I partnered with a local housing equity group to review every policy and translate the fine print into something human. We eliminated vague language like visual harmony and traditional appearances. We capped board terms at 2 years. We created a grievance system that actually required evidence before fines could be issued. And perhaps most importantly, we passed a rule that said, no HOA board member may directly or indirectly profit from their position, nor may they target a resident based on race, income, or perceived social status. Violations will result in immediate dismissal. That clause? We called it the Pamela provision. Unanimously approved. The neighborhood began to shift. Slowly at first. The gay couple down the street repainted their porch lavender without fear of citation. The retired teacher, who once got fined for growing too many tomatoes, now hosted weekend garden tours. The young woman who'd been silently dealing with Glenn's creepy notes, she came forward and filed a formal ethics complaint, which was finally investigated. Change wasn't just coming. It was happening. And then something I never expected occurred. A letter arrived in my mailbox. No threats, no sarcasm, just a small, plain envelope with a handwritten note inside. I didn't get it before. Now I do. You didn't make this neighborhood worse. You made it honest. No signature, but I knew who it was. Arthur, the quiet man who'd once warned me to be careful, had finally chosen a side, and it was mine. Then one Saturday, 6 months after the lawsuit, the neighborhood hosted its first official community day. No one knew who started it. There was no vote, no clipboard sign-up. Just tables, folding chairs, barbecue grills, kids with sidewalk chalk, dogs on leashes, music humming from someone's Bluetooth speaker. I brought lemonade and a few pans of jollof rice, something my mom used to make when the neighborhood in our old block would have a cookout. And as I stood there, paper plate in hand, watching an old man toss bean bags with a little girl who called him Grandpa G, something inside me finally exhaled. That old man? Walter. He wasn't smiling, but he wasn't scowling either. We made eye contact. He nodded. I nodded back. That was enough. Later, as the sun set and the sky turned soft pink, someone stood near the old HOA bulletin board with a paintbrush. They painted over faded gold words, preserving tradition, and replaced them with, everyone belongs. I didn't tell them to, didn't suggest it, didn't even know who did it. But when I saw it, I smiled. Because finally, this wasn't just a win for me. It was a win for every person who'd ever been told their clothes were too plain, their accent too strong, their ramp too long, or their mailbox too different. It was proof that no matter how deep the roots of petty power run, community isn't built on control. It's built on respect. And if anyone ever asked me how I went from that poor-looking guy to the man who bought the Queen's castle, I'd say this. Sometimes the best way to fix a broken system is to own it. Literally.